There's a new kid in town, and he's as free as the land. That's this week on Motoring 2001.
TSN's Motoring 2001 is brought to you by Quaker State Motor Oils, formulated for the vehicles you drive and the way you drive them. And Midas. Keep a good thing going. Go Midas.
This week we're in Moosonee, Ontario, located in the spectacular Hudson Bay lowlands. This is the ancestral home of the Cree and the path of the earliest explorers in Ontario's far north. Hello everybody, and watcha, which is Cree for welcome. Now we're here to meet a vehicle that will be making its North American debut this fall. Now it's a member of the Land Rover family, and if you'll remember back in the mid-80s, this was a company in deep trouble. It simply didn't have the product to compete with the fast-growing mid-size sport utility segment, until Discovery came along and almost single-handedly saved Land Rover. Well, fast forward to the present, and now it's the subcompact sport utility market that is growing. But once again, Land Rover is ready to do battle, but this time with a vehicle that has already proven itself a winner.
The Freelander was launched in Europe in the fall of 1997 as a 1998 model. Very quickly became the best-selling sport utility vehicle in Europe. We're very pleased to have it here, and obviously there was some delay in getting it here was due to the fact that it had to be properly positioned in the market. So V6, automatic, some exterior and interior appointments that are requested by North American buyers.
Competition, as you know, has been growing over the last few years, and this segment is getting very crowded. And bringing the vehicle in, we wanted to make sure that we were in the leading edge of it. And what we're after is basically that upper level of the segment. So like we did with Range Rover back in 1990, is we're going after the luxury segment of that segment in question.
2.5 liter, 6-cylinder engine. Puts it 175 horsepower, puts it through a 5-speed automatic transmission with a Steptronic feature that really moves out quite nicely.
In the British Isles and other agricultural countries, there are still many farmers who rely on the horse as a means of pulling machinery and heavy loads. What I want, says many a farmer, is something that can do everything the horse can do, plus a lot more, and at 3 times the speed.
When they started, they produced a very rugged, simple vehicle that was aimed at farmers and whatnot. And it stayed that up through, up into the late 60s perhaps.
Here it is, the Land Rover. A tough, chunky, cheeky, versatile vehicle with an unlimited capacity for hard work. You can almost see it cock a snook at the old horse in the next field and hear it say, "Anything you can do, I can do better. Next job, please."
And when the Range Rover arrived in the early 70s, the whole company took a decided step-up market, and they've kind of been there ever since. They still produce their rugged vehicles for the Army and trekking off to Africa and whatnot, but they're known, I think, on North America for a high-level vehicle. This is kind of bringing it down to a level where more people at least, can afford it, but it's much more accessible than it's ever been before.
Land Rover as a whole, worldwide, we're still a small company, even though we're part of Ford. But our segment, Land Rover, total capacity is under 200,000 units a year. So for Canada, for example, we're looking at doubling our volume with Freelander. And this may sound like a very large statement, but we're going from 1,100 units to hopefully 2,200 units in 2002.
The car is solid like a rock. The Steptronic transmission is a beauty to play with, especially when you want to do some off-road, you want to feel some connection with the road, and the Steptronic give you that kind of communion.
It's obviously very capable of doing what the people who will buy that type of vehicle want it to do. I mean, I said to one of the Land Rover people, it's like driving a car up here, but with a 4x4 down here.
Well, Freelander will be the entry level for Land Rover. It'll be a price range of $35,000 to $40,000. Discovery pulls up the middle quite nicely at a range of $47,000 to $51,000, plus a few little options that take it to the mid-50 range. And Range Rover is the quintessential Land Rover. It's the high end of all sport utility vehicles, but it is the benchmark by which I think everything else is being measured against.
I think it will be a huge success, because around $40,000 to get that kind of a truck with that badge on it, it should be neat.
It was once said that Discovery may have saved the company. How important is Freelander to this company?
Well, Discovery saved it. Freelander is giving it, in my estimation anyway, a whole new life. When I drove the vehicle, right away in my mind I said, this is a rally car. So the fun, the excitement, the ability to drive a vehicle and yet be different. I mean, this is what Land Rover is all about.
It's not exactly a palm tree, but that's as close to California as we could get. California dreaming, or perhaps more like a nightmare, later on Kenzie's Corner.
You know, North American manufacturers always offered a lot of car for the dollar, at least in terms of size. But if you wanted a big import, you had to dig deep. But that's changing, and Mazda are leading the charge with this Revamp Protege.
The 2001 Protege is more a mid-cycle rework than a wholesale change. That stated, the changes are significant. The chassis is stiffer, which gives the strut-based suspension a solid base of operations. Indeed, the handling and overall responsiveness are among the highlights. During the pylon test, the Protege showed minimal body roll, responded nicely to steering input, and understeer is far enough out that most will only encounter it during moments of full throttle enthusiasm.
That noise right there tells you that this car does not have anti-lock brakes. Now, normally I'd start berating Mazda for that fact. However, considering the ABS is only a $500 option and the car only costs between $16,000 and $18,000, it is tough to criticize. Mind you, if you buy a Protege, spend the 500 beans and take the ABS.
Comments aside, the front disc rear drum brake design yields short stops and a firm progressive pedal. When you do go with the ABS, it features electronic brake force distribution, which keeps the ABS out until it is really needed.
To make the best use of the space available, Mazda used something called Octi Space. Now, as the name suggests, it makes optimum use of the space available. Now, they do this in part by raising the hip point of the front seat. When you do that, you can push everything forward relative to the center line of the car. The advantage, you no longer have to be folded like a pretzel when you sit in the back. The other space advantage is the trunk. You get split folding rear seats and an enormous 12.9 cubic feet of cargo space.
The other area the Protege takes a big step forward is the new 2-litre twin-cam engine. It brings a worthwhile 130 horses and 135 pounds-feet of torque. Off-the-line response is good, and between 2500 and the 6500 RPM redline, it pulls strongly and without a lot of unnecessary noise. Indeed, in the quiet stakes, both road and engine noise are suitably quelled.
If you go with the top-of-the-line Protege ES, you get a very well-equipped vehicle. Power locks, windows, mirrors, cruise control, white-face gauges for the instruments. What I am impressed with, climate control and radio. You can operate the climate control without taking your eyes off the road, and the knobs for the radio, well, they're large enough to operate even with these silly things. The one lone drawback, however, is just all too dark across the center of the dash. They should have used a little more of this nice titanium trim elsewhere.
2 transmissions are offered. The 5-speed manual box brings well-spaced ratios and a light progressive clutch. This combination makes the most of the newfound zoom zoom. The automatic box works well enough that the shiftless will not have to worry when overtaking a slower moving vehicle, as the kick down to a lower gear is suitably quick. The difference between manual and automatic cars is about 1.5 seconds when ripping to 100k. On the safety front, the Protégé scores well, bringing dual depowered front airbags, a stiff structure and 3-point belts with load limiters and pre-tensioners in all outboard positions.
You know, the reworked Protégé has got an awful lot going for it. It's agile, it's got a great engine, at least if you go with the 2-litre motor, it's got plenty of interior space, and considering it's a compact car, well, it's got near mid-sized dimensions, especially in the rear seat and in the trunk. The other thing it's got is affordability. All in all, a very nice package.
Our Midas tip of the week concerns water exiting your exhaust system. Water is a byproduct of combustion. It's normal that it enters your exhaust system every time you run the engine. You see it exiting the tailpipe as a white vapor. Now, depending on the ambient temperature and how long your trips are, will depend on how much vapor you see exiting the tailpipe. In cold climates, on short trips, you're going to see a lot of white vapor coming out of that tailpipe. Now, you'll also quite often see liquid dripping out of certain points of the exhaust system, and many of today's vehicles have a drainage port built into the back of the muffler to help get rid of some of that water vapor. Now, the combination of that water vapor and the acids that are present in the exhaust stream of your car is one of the things that contributes to the shortening of the life of your exhaust system. It corrodes holes right through it. Now, don't be concerned by that moisture. Just remember that short trips are going to shorten the life of your exhaust system on your vehicle. That's your Midas tip of the week.
It's called the Super 8, and it was great because we really sort of looked at it, instead of trying to do something that seemed more European or something that was not really, that may have looked European. We really wanted to do something very American and try to execute it somewhat nostalgically, but very modern. I hate to say this, but and I'm surprised General Motors has never used some of it, but they could capitalize on a ton of things, and this could be a GM or a Chrysler car from the 50s, and that's really basically what it's about. I mean, if you thought about a 55 Chevy or a 56 Windsor Deluxe Dodge, I mean, any of those would fit the bill. What drove the windshield was we were looking at doing, from the outset, a D-class size car, and to package everything, to move the windshield forward and sort of flatten it a little bit, instead of laying it over, we're going to pull it up and flatten it across in plan view. And it sort of makes the inner part of the car look bigger, and that way we can be a little more efficient on the exterior and get a very American feel. So it's almost a lot of dash to axle, from the heel to the front of the wheel, and that's sort of an American virtue in cars. Rear wheel drive, of course, big V8, all that.
What you're watching right now is the traditional cooking methods that are practiced by the Moose Cree First Nation and the Cree people of the James Bay area. The item that you see cooking by the fire is a beaver, which is hung on a string, and is like a rotisserie method of the modern day style rotisseries. Back then, we did not have any cooking utensils or anything like that. We had to use things that we got off the land. So, for instance, sticks, and also for the string, we used sinew. The bread was introduced to the natives when the Europeans came into our area, where they started trading their flour for our fur. The type of bread is called bannock. It's like a Scottish scone. We still do these harvesting practices. It's basically a tradition in the James Bay area.
Now, the people of Moosonee and the surrounding area here in the Hudson Bay lowland love winter, and I'll tell you why. This place is only accessible by either train or plane, and once you get here, there are no roads connecting the small communities. So in the summertime, the only mode of transportation is boat, which can be limited. But in the winter, where temperatures drop to between 50 and 60 below, an entire highway traffic system emerges all over the frozen lakes and rivers. And with the ice reaching a thickness of over 7 feet, wintertime finally allows everyone the freedom of travel. Now, we're talking roads of ice, stop signs, speed limits, and guess what? Very few car accidents. Now, could you imagine us city folk commuting on this ice every day? Man, it'd be complete carnage. All right, let's head to the garage and join Bill Gardner.
Brad, no kidding. Where I live in Toronto, it only takes a few flakes of snow to cause total mayhem on the roads. But you know what? I love driving on snow-packed roads, how quiet and smooth the vehicle runs, and on ice you can steer the back end of that rear-wheel drive vehicle with the power. I love that. Anyhow, we've got an email we want to answer this week from one of our viewers out in Regina, Saskatchewan, where they're used to driving on lots of ice and snow. And this viewer's name is B.A. Abalio from Regina. They have a 93 Aerostar van with 155K, use synthetic oil, engine runs smoothly, service regularly, etc. When I had my oil changed at a major chain out here recently, oil filter turned loose after about 2 weeks. What was the cause and why did it take 2 weeks? Well, I think in all likelihood was whoever serviced the vehicle just failed to follow the instructions. You'll notice on an oil filter, they usually tell you how much to tighten it after it contacts the base. You spin it on to the engine, it spins on very freely, and when it first contacts the engine, you make note of the position and you add, in this case, 3/4 of a turn. In some cases, it'll tell you on the filter 1 full turn. It's the old story, when in doubt, follow the instructions. And people seem to have a problem with this. And when it leaks a little bit, when a service person has one leak on them, they overcompensate for years afterwards and ridiculously over-tighten them. Now, the second part of this question is, they ask, notice the warning light come on, check engine oil. I heard the engine make some knocking sounds, put 3 liters of oil in the engine just to reach home. Will it affect my engine in the future since I was running on virtually no oil? Now that engine holds 4 to 4.5 liters of oil, so if it was down 3, yeah, you were dangerously low, but you still did have a little bit of oil in there. Now the clicking sounds, the noise that you heard that engine making, in all likelihood was the hydraulic valve lifters losing their prime and starting to clatter. It was a good thing because it was an audible prompt to tell you to A, to turn the engine off, and B, check the engine oil, which saved you. Now, remember that the bottom end of the engine, the crankshaft, connecting rods, camshaft, and hydraulic valve lifters all receive engine oil under pressure from the oil pump. Goes through that filter we talked about first, and then is delivered to all those areas of the engine at about 30 to 35 psi of oil pressure. When you're down that low on oil and the oil light comes on, you've got maybe 3 or 4 psi of oil pressure or less, and you start to hear those lifters making noise. Thank goodness you turned the thing off. However, even though you were that low on oil and the oil light was on and the oil pressure was down to 3 or 4 psi, you still had a film of engine oil lubricating those parts. That's what we call boundary lubrication. And a lot of areas of the engine, for example, the rocker arms, push rods, valves, even the pistons in the engine receive oil that is splashed from other parts of the engine. They don't get oil under pressure. So all they ever get is that thin film of oil that's splashed from other areas. Now, in this case, the fact that you're using synthetic oil probably saved your engine. I've used synthetics in my engines since the early 80s, and I found in a couple of instances I've had occurrences where some severe overheating has happened to the engine, and I know darn well the only thing that saved my engine from seizing or being damaged was the fact that I was using synthetic. That's one more good reason to think about using it, even though it costs about double the price of regular oil. In this case, in our viewer's case with his Aerostar van, I think it was probably the difference between that engine not seizing and still being able to run reliably today. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 2001.
California, you gotta love it. What a study in contrasts. You've got Adam Sandler in Hollywood making $20 million for 4 weeks' work on some stupid movie. 6 blocks away, you got hundreds of people sleeping in cardboard boxes. It's the world's center for conspicuous consumption. I mean, scullery maids are driving around in Porsches, and yet they keep electing sandal-wearing politicians that enact the most stringent environmental legislation in the world. The climate is such that you can get away with driving a 40-year-old Volkswagen that pollutes the atmosphere like crazy, and yet the law says car makers have to build emissions-free vehicles that nobody wants to buy. Right now there's a law in the books that says by 2003, 10% of all cars sold in California must be zero emissions. With current technology, that means electric cars. Imagine 25,000 electric cars on the 405 freeway every day. But where are they going to get the power? You've been reading the news recently? They can't even light their homes, for crying out loud. I was in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel a while ago, getting ready to watch my beloved Maple Leafs play the Detroit Red Wings, and the power went out. The Leafs even won and I didn't see it. I'll never forgive California for that. Now, you'd think California would have learned from the savings and loan crisis a bunch of years ago when millions of people lost their shirts because of a stupid privatization of the financial system. So what do? They privatize power generation. Now there isn't any. The poor little Californians can't even run in their hot tubs. How are they going to reproduce? Well, maybe it's just as well. But it proves what they say about California being their granola state. Once you get rid of the nuts and the Fruit Loops, there's nothing left but the flakes. I'm Jim Kenzie.
Before we go, we want to thank everybody at the Moose Cree First Nation for their warm hospitality here in Moosonee and the neighboring island of Moose Factory. You know, this could be one of this country's best kept secrets because there's something for everyone here all year round. And believe me, the welcome sign is always out for new visitors. And one final word on the new Freelander. We've only had a couple of days in the vehicle, but first impressions all round have been good. And later in the fall, when the vehicle is released, Graham will take a closer look on test drive. That's it for now. We'll see you next time out as we continue to bring you more stories about cars and the people who drive them.
TSN's Motoring 2001 has been brought to you by Quaker State Motor Oils, formulated for the vehicles you drive and the way you drive them. And Midas. Keep a good thing going. Go Midas.